Hey there, friends. Welcome to another week. Although, remember, the work week is a fiction. Monday doubly so. Especially this week. You can get rid of them if you really want to. This is Social Justice Alchemy. So, alien abductions, visitations, ancient aliens. People really love to believe that we're not alone. People do still believe this kind of thing, but it kind of feels like the heyday was back in the 60s and 70s. Maybe I'm just not tapped into the credulous community, though. I took a look on Reddit. r/abductions has about the same number of subscribers as r/antivax. There are alien abduction pages and groups on Facebook, too, with thousands or tens of thousands of fans. But anti-vax pages on Facebook tend to have hundreds of thousands of followers. That is to say, anti-vax is much more popular on Facebook. Okay, what I'm saying is it feels like alien wannabes are more in the past. Of course, a year ago I would have said the same thing about flat earth nonsense, and look where we are now. Anywho, Carl Sagan's book, The Demon-Haunted World, Science as a Candle in the Dark, spent a lot of time dealing with alien abductions. Yeah, I mean, it dealt with other stuff too, but he wrote it in response to the pseudoscience and myths that he encountered as a science educator in the 70s and 80s. Demon-Haunted World was published in 95, a year before he died. Really, the book's purpose is to discuss scientific methods and how they can be used to suss out junk science and pseudoscience in real life. He just used things like alien abductions and alien visitations as examples for how to apply the tools in his baloney detection kit. He was neat. Anyway, alien abductions and visitations. We'll save ancient aliens or ancient astronauts for later. Ever since we started sending stuff into outer space, people have been talking about getting harassed by aliens. Oddly, no one talked about getting visited by aliens before that. But they did talk about getting harassed by angels, demons, ghosts, saints, elves, whatever. In other words, people have always been talking about visitations. So, alien abduction or visitation believers say that pre-20th century folk who talked about angels and the like were talking about aliens. They just didn't know about outer space, and were putting it in terms of stuff they understood. Meanwhile, a lot of religious folks say that alien abduction folk are getting fooled by demons. Either way, we're probably talking about the same phenomenon. Just, is it sci-fi or fantasy? It's fiction either way. Now, you might be surprised to learn that we do have documentation of angel and demon visitations going back centuries. Demon-Haunted World is a good resource for this. Sagan talks about it a bit. And they really do sound like alien abduction or visitation stories that we get today. The visitors all look more or less human. Just, with dreamlike distortions. They might be really tall or thin and might have short with huge eyes or whatever. Only rarely are they truly weird. Another common feature of these visitations is that the visitors bring messages. For a while there, aliens were warning people to avoid war. Then they were warning people to avoid nuclear war. Then they started warning people about global warming. Ancient angels or demons or the Virgin Mary or whatever, they had warnings too. Oddly, the warnings these visitors delivered are always incredibly parochial. They never warn people about things before we've already discovered them. People weren't getting warnings about nuclear weapons in the 1920s. We didn't start getting warnings about global warming until it became a hot topic in the press. A little girl who got a visitation from the Virgin Mary in the 1400s got a warning about going to church and tithing. No warnings about the coming plague, no hints about how to build a good sanitation system or city walls to withstand cannon fire or anything like that. That is to say, despite being representatives of hyper-advanced technical civilization or magical beings from another plane of existence, these visitors never give people any information that those people didn't already have. They never give any warnings about any problems that people haven't already discovered for themselves. In short, these beings seem very limited. And that's a big part of why it's not reasonable to believe that any sort of visitation or alien abduction is happening. The other part is that these events always occur when a person is asleep. Or they'll insist they weren't asleep, but they were always alone or in an isolated location and no one was ever in a position to corroborate. Or anyone who could have corroborated has nothing to say because they were definitely asleep. It's also really common for drugs or alcohol to be involved. So, the fact that these things always have a lot of dreamlike elements isn't at all surprising. The weird sensations people report, the oddly distorted aliens or angels who are almost always humanoid, the vague, broken quality to their memories, everything points to people being asleep and or in an altered state due to intoxicants. Nevertheless, people will insist that they have evidence, and then they'll point to things like Department of Defense videos that supposedly show an encounter between a Navy pilot and a UFO. It's a weird video. You can't explain it. It's official. It's aliens. Now, Wired did a great analysis of those particular videos and their origins. Link in the thingy. And it looks like we don't really know where the videos came from. I'm talking about a specific set of videos, by the way. One of the earliest appearances of this particular set of videos was from a video production company. Now, frauds like this are incredibly common. People are always wanting to make money off believers of every stripe. I mean, you'll get fake fossils, fake paleontological artifacts of any kind, fake archaeological stuff. People are always willing to make a buck, right? However, even if we grant that these particular videos are real, they still don't help. This is what's known as anomaly hunting. When a believer goes looking for weird things, then insisting that they count as evidence of their beliefs. That is, they find poor quality evidence or something that doesn't match their expectations, then declare that their weird theory is true because science can't explain that. Or, you can't explain it. You particularly, you the individual. You have to come up with an explanation right now, or their idea stands. So, for example, ghost hunters go to old houses with cameras and temperature probes and EM detectors and wait for something. You wait long enough, you're going to get something. Drafts calls cold spots. You're carting around a lot of equipment in houses with old wiring, and you're going to get some weird electric or magnetic fields. They also love things like rods and orbs, inexplicable weird things that show up on cameras. And they're right. You can't. Wait, it's dust. It's dust caught in the flash of the camera. Okay, it shows up as a big bright dot orb or a smeared rod because it's moving. Or look at conspiracy theorists. They really love anomalies. Weird bits in the official story that don't match or that they think doesn't make sense. Look at the film. His head moves backwards. You can't explain that. We can, actually. This is talking about JFK's head in the Zapruder film. A high-powered rifle creates both an entry wound and an exit wound. His head jerks forward when the bullet hits. When the bullet hits from the rear, then backwards when the bullet exits. It makes it explosive exit. Anyway. Moon landing nut jobs are pretty bad about this, too. They look at photos and videos that were taken on the moon and point out all the weird things that they think prove the moon landings were faked. These are all pretty face-palmingly awful because the things they point out as anomalous would be anomalous if the photos were taken on Earth. They look incredibly strange because they were taken on the moon, with different gravity and no atmosphere. As for UFO hunters, if you collect enough photo and video of the sky, you're gonna find some weird phenomena. Things that don't quite make sense at first glance. Things that might genuinely be inexplicable if only because there's only the one photo, or a video just comes to an abrupt end. In other words, you're gonna get edge cases which, even if they aren't faked, rely on us not having evidence. You gather enough evidence, you'll find anomalies. You get blips and scratches and fuzz, equipment malfunctions and dings and so on, and the fact that you don't have more evidence around the anomaly is what they point to as evidence that the anomaly is whatever they want. A lot of abductees, so-called, also point to weird stuff going on with their skin. Bruises, can't explain those. Or odd scratches. Nope. This weird pattern of bumps, can't explain that. Except we can. You move in your sleep, you have allergic reactions. Your cat jumps on you in your sleep. Just because you don't have a mundane explanation or don't want a mundane explanation doesn't mean there isn't one. So, no, alien abduction believers don't have evidence. They have things they can't explain, and then they claim that the lack of an explanation is the explanation. Just like religion, really. At this point, alien abduction seems kind of like a low-hanging fruit. But an even lower-hanging fruit would be the flat Earth, and that shit's making a comeback. It seems to me that some false beliefs are based on a desire to explain things, or a desire to be special. People want everything to fit within a narrative on the one hand, and they really want to be the center of that narrative on the other. Now, that search for meaning isn't limited to small-minded fascists like Jordan Peterson and his Lobster Boys. We all want meaning, to some degree. Now, another problem is that we're not naturally good scientists. To do good science, you have to try and prove that your hypothesis is false. Okay? You have to really, really try to find evidence against your hypothesis. And the more you fail to find that evidence, the more you can believe your hypothesis is probably right. But that requires discipline and training. Because even considering that you might be wrong engenders cognitive dissonance. The natural tendency is to try and prove your hypothesis is correct, to seek out evidence confirming it, to ignore the evidence you don't like, and to find communities that support you. And of course, some people are just jackasses. Alright, that does it for alien abductions. Let's move on to, it's not going to be a holiday-themed song because my wrist is hurting, so I went with something simple. A little easier to play. Monty Python, Always Look on the Bright Side of Life. Some things in life are bad, they can really make you mad. Other things just make you swear and curse. When you're chewing on life's gristle, don't grumble, give a whistle. And this'll help things turn out for the best. And always look on the bright side of life. Yes, always look on the light side of life. If life seems jolly rotten, there's something you forgot, and that's to laugh and smile and dance and sing. When you're feeling in the dumps, so don't be silly chumps. Just purse your lips and whistle, that's the thing. And always look on the bright side of life. Yes, always look on the bright side of life. For life is quite absurd, and death's the final word. You must always face the curtain with a bow. Forget about your sin, give the audience a grin. Enjoy it, it's your last chance anyhow. And always look on the bright side of death. Just before you draw your terminal breath. Life's a piece of shit when you look at it. Life's a laugh and death's a joke, it's true. You'll see it's all a show, keep 'em laughing as you go. Just remember that the last laugh is on you. And always look on the bright side of life. And always look on the right side of life. As always, look on the right side of life. And always look on the right side of life. For a moment he felt good about this. A moment or two later he felt bad about feeling good about it. Then he felt good about feeling bad about feeling good about it, and, satisfied, drove on into the night. Douglas Adams. Man, conservatives love them some white guilt, yeah? Well, they hate it. They love to hate it. So what is white guilt? Well, it's a little bit of individual and collective shame felt by white people over current and historical racism in the U.S. Oh, and there's a great big that Wikipedia follows that up with, quote, and to a lesser extent in Canada, South Africa, and the United Kingdom. What? South Africans don't see the need to feel guilty about anything they've done? I mean, the UK doesn't look as bad as South Africa from the outside, but they're racist as fuck. I mean, I get it for Canada. They still live with the lie that they've never done anything racist. I mean, they don't realize how awful they are to brown people up there. I mean, they'll get theirs, is what I'm saying. Anyway, white guilt is kind of a middle-class phenomenon. White people in the suburbs with no real connection to brown people feel mildly bad about things that have happened to brown people. This lets them get away with not doing anything about what's happening right now. Well, it can let them get away with that. White guilt is kind of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can be real guilt, sorrow, anger over how people of color have been treated and are being treated. And pervasive negative emotions really can have an ongoing serious impact, like depression and anxiety. On the other hand, not only does white guilt sidetrack white people into seeking absolution instead of solutions, and not only does it let white people feel like they've done enough just by feeling bad, but racists, aka Republicans, get to use it to fight against anti-racist programs. Judith Katz, an educator and strategist, has dealt with white guilt in her efforts at anti-racism training. Specifically, she was moved to segregate her groups and remove black educators because white people in anti-racism training kept looking for acceptance and forgiveness rather than trying to learn. The purpose of the education was to recognize and correct problematic attitudes and behaviors, and white participants kept getting sidetracked. So, yeah, white guilt can be a problem when it turns away from the people still being harmed by racism and towards self-congratulation or flagellation on the part of the white people. And it can be a real pain in the ass. People of color are already spending a lot of time and energy trying to overcome racism. The fact that they have to convince white people that racism is still a problem is a huge barrier. That they then have to waste time getting white people to shut up and stop feeling bad and start working on solutions is another big burden. People of color are already fighting for their lives. They shouldn't have to also take on the burden of helping you get over your feelings about the fact that they're fighting for their lives. Another problem is that a lot of white people acknowledge white guilt and leave it at that. It's like they take a look at Avenue Q and everyone's a little bit racist and said, yep, I'm a good person. Yeah. Okay. Now, the quote I read at the beginning in a slightly British voice came from The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, in which a truck driver splashed water all over a soaking wet hitchhiker in the rain. He felt good about it in a small-hearted bully kind of way, then he felt bad about that. And then he felt good about feeling bad about feeling good about it. And that last bit was him deciding that he was absolved of his sins because he'd felt bad. Yeah, okay, so it's easy to put this in Christian terms. And this bullshit method of absolution is baked into Christianity. I remember a youth pastor telling a story about a time in college when he insulted a heavyset girl who was buying one of his albums. He played guitar. He later found out she had dropped out of school, and he felt so bad about it. But he got to apologize to God, and that made it okay. So very Christian. You apologize to an imaginary friend who you didn't harm, or the harm you may or may not have actually done to a real person you've never bothered to make amends with. I don't want to claim this is unique to Christianity. Religion generally doesn't seem to ever actually invent anything new. Christianity in particular is a hodgepodge of ideas stolen from other religions. I think it's a problem of civilization, of living in large populations, of societal structures that encourage or require suffering in large numbers of people. We are empathic, caring beings, by and large, And we don't like seeing suffering. And actually solving those problems is entirely beyond the capacity of any one person. So, white guilt can be used as a sort of symbolic expiation. By recognizing that bad things are happening, you absolve yourself of the sin. You can get on with your day without having to feel bad all the time. In a way, this is necessary. You can't really function if you allow yourself to feel the burden of those negative emotions all the time. On the other, you actually have to do something about it. Just recognizing the problem isn't enough. Inaction allows the problem to persist and makes you part of the problem. So, ironically, white guilt as expiation is worse than simple ignorance, because it makes you feel like the problem has already been solved merely by having been seen. But worse than that is white guilt wielded as a weapon by the right. They love to use it to rile up white people. I never did nothing wrong. Why should I feel bad? Why should I be punished? The Social Justice Wiki specifically links white guilt to not all X, a silencing tactic used to derail discussions of social justice. It can be similar to how people leap to attack vegetarians, even when the vegetarian hasn't said anything, because the person feels implicitly attacked by the moral judgment buried in the commitment to veganism or vegetarianism in and of itself. But that's just this sort of not all white people response you'll get from the man on the street. The right as a movement actively weaponizes white guilt. They'll take that simple, instinctive response and dial it up to 11. Talk show and radio hosts make incredibly emotional appeals all the time, and their rage against this assumption of guilt is just huge among them. It really boils down to, I'm a good person, you're implying that I'm a bad person, so fuck you. Fuck you very much. Okay. It leads to the rage so often evinced against Black Lives Matter, and the fact that right-wingers refuse to actually say Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. The response by the right is vicious and self-righteous. The Republican Party deliberately allied itself with the KKK 50 years ago and immediately switched to dog whistle politics in order to not alienate all the other white people who were, let's be absolutely clear about this, incredibly racist, but not as benightedly, viciously, gleefully racist as the Southern monsters who Republicans were courting. The result is that the Republican Party is the home of the people who either embrace racism, race realism, or merely are incredibly racist but refuse to recognize the fact and resent it whenever it's brought up. People on the right largely recognize that racism is a bad thing, except, once again, those who embrace race realism, and hate the criticism represented by people of color. The ongoing discrimination against and suffering of non-white people is a strong moral condemnation against white people. That's why so many seek absolution rather than solutions, and it's why the right rejects the premise entirely. When you actually embrace empathy and compassion, the world becomes a rather hellish place. Billions of people live in suffering or despair, and much of that is straightforwardly the result of the wealthiest and most powerful nations. We in the U.S. bear huge moral responsibility for the deaths and torments of billions of people for the last century, and of millions of people in the century and a half prior to that. But there's an important word to get out of that last sentence. Responsibility. Something that anti-racism activists have been focusing on for a very long time is responsibility rather than collective guilt. Guilt is inward-focused. It's kind of narcissistic. It ignores the suffering of others. Compassion and empathy in the face of such large problems, such widespread suffering, require us to eschew guilt in favor of responsibility. No, I didn't cause these problems. I'm not guilty for the ongoing sufferings of people around the globe. It's not something I did. But I have some measure of wealth and power as a white person and citizen of the United States. If I choose to do nothing, then I will be guilty of allowing that suffering to continue. I have a responsibility to use my position to do the right thing. I cannot just pass by on the other side. In the end, What matters most is cleaning up the mess, not assigning guilt. This doesn't eliminate the problem represented by the right-wing douche canoes, but it does offer a path forward. And that'll do it for another week in Social Justice Alchemy. I've been your host, John Brockman. If you like what I'm doing here, please like, share, subscribe. Leave positive reviews on iTunes, or incredibly negative, hateful reviews if that's your thing. If you want to talk back at me, you can hunt me down on YouTube. That's the Social Justice Alchemy YouTube channel. Or you can comment on my blog, surgoshan.blogspot.com, surgoshan.blogspot.com. If you're looking for something entirely different, then I take part in another podcast. It's the Dungeons and Debacles podcast, hosted by my friend Kevin. We are an evil party seeking to unleash an ancient red dragon. It is a heck of a lot of fun. All right. Thanks for stopping by. I'll see you next week.
Won't we? Yes, we will. Yeah. Won't we? Say goodbye. Yeah.
As always, look on the right side.